Hello and welcome to another episode of This Week in Goldmaking, presented by Darkshorecapital. On this, the 11th day of February, 2018, my name is Andrew, and I'm going to take you through this week's market update. There's a few things I want to point out on this slide today. Number one, last week we saw an astronomical rise in price of these Starlight Roses. This was, in my speculation, mostly due to Mythic Jaina progression. If anyone was not aware, Mythic Jaina has an intermission phase, during which a speed boost can be very helpful during progression in order to help speed things up a little bit and prolong your life. And yeah, the price last week on Starlight Roses were like Legion levels on the EU side of things. So it seemed like there were a lot of EU guilds using those for progression. There are a few explanations for why the price has now returned back to around 30 gold. Number one, maybe a bunch of us goblins looked in our Legion stores and realized that we had a bunch of them just sitting around. Another possibility is all the herb farmers took their sky golems back to the Broken Isles and ran around picking Starlight Rose in Suramar. Or what I think is more likely the case, people realized that it's really just a progression tool. It turns out the DPS requirements on the later stages of that fight mandate the need for actual battle potions, so no more Starlight Rose price increase. That's my analysis of the situation, at least. Other interesting increase, Primal Fire jumped about 100 gold over the last week on the EU side of things. That's, I don't know what to think about that. I mean, Primals are a somewhat short supply item, so it's certainly possible that, someone's just doing a lot of crafting, or a lot of people are doing a lot of crafting because this is regional pricing, and the price has just increased. I can't think of any other reason why it would have increased other than that. And then lastly, we've added another line to the services category of the slide, and that's the 111 boost, freehold, carries, whatever. Basically power leveling, gold paid through by gold power leveling of your characters. Someone's got a twink, either 111 or 110, and they can run freehold or whatever dungeon it is repeatedly for a few hours to get you up to max level real quick. So the way you read this is the price is somewhere between 20 and 60,000 gold, depending on your server. It looks like about a 30,000 gold average, and that's per level that you want to gain. So if you wanted to gain 10 levels to go from 110 to 120, you would be paying around 300,000 gold. I do want to thank my good friend on Twitter, Mr. Dorkside, for A of all asking to include this information, and B of all basically doing all of the work himself, going out and doing a bunch of research, figuring out what the prices are. So major shout out to him. If you don't follow him on Twitter, you absolutely should. He does a lot of really high-powered gold server transferring stuff. You should check him out. I lied. There's one more thing to talk about. ATVI, Activision Blizzard stock, took kind of a nosedive this week, down 14% from the last week. About $40. It's getting pretty low there. More on that in a moment. Getting into the news. TSM version 4.7 was released early this morning, I believe. There's a changelog. You can check it out. I looked through it. Nothing astronomical. A bunch of bug fixes, some updates, optimizations, which is always fantastic. I certainly have not been scared to voice my concerns about lacking features and bugs and stuff with TSM 4. More on that later as well. But, more updates, always good. Should update automatically. Shouldn't need to do anything if you've got TSM app installed. Next piece of news, the Ulduar Gold farm in quotations has been fixed. I'm sure many of you are aware of the 700 gold drops that were coming from Ulduar. We talked about that last week, actually. Blizzard finally did something about it, changed it, something that was obviously a mistake in my mind. Nothing that I don't think anyone should have gotten banned for it. I don't think anyone did get banned for it. Fine, Blizzard made a mistake. They fixed it. Moving on with our lives. Next item, Love is in the Air World Event is coming up shortly. A couple just points about that in case you want to make gold with it. I don't particularly think it's a great one to do, but here you go if you want to think about it. There's some dresses and shirts, actually, that drop out of something that comes from the events, and they're worth anywhere between 10 and 40k, at least for the dresses. So that's not nothing. Maybe something you want to look at. And then, of course, the Swift Lovebird, which is a mount. Yeah, it's a mount. It's a seasonal mount. So the idea is basically it's at its lowest price during the event, and then it slowly climbs over the year, and then somewhere about a month or two beforehand, the price tanks and goes back down. So if you want to try and make some money off of it, okay, now's the time to buy. Not really my cup of tea, since it's a bit too long-term and tying funds up a little bit too much for my taste. Have done this in the past, just not that exciting really for me. Next piece of news, back to ATVI, Activision Blizzard stock. Their Q4 earnings for last year are due to be announced tomorrow. As of the recording of this is Tuesday of this week, February 12th. Yeah, so this is a big one because it's Q4 is always the annual report for companies, so a lot more detail than you get in the quarterly reports. So yeah, I'm definitely planning to do some stuff around this, go over, we'll probably actually wind up doing a stream or webcast of listening to their webcast, going over updating the model and just kind of generally, just going over the news, see what happens. I'm sure there are many, many people who are not expecting great results. We will see. And then lastly, this isn't really a piece of news, but just more something that I've been doing recently and didn't have anywhere else to stick it, so we're going to talk about it here. I rag on TSM a lot, but I've been using a lot more of the new features in TSM for lately, and it's definitely worth it. It's definitely worth all the headache and the trouble you have to go through because, man, that sell rate feature is pretty great. So thank you, TSM guys. I really appreciate that. I'm sure many of you are aware of a little thing that goes by the name of the Daily Mailbox on Twitter. And this is a neat little hashtag, if you will, that you can either follow or, at least for me, most of these just kind of pop up on my newsfeed because I follow most of these people anyway. And it's just, somebody had the idea to start posting pictures of our mailboxes every day and see what's in them. This is a great idea, honestly. Like, people have kind of done this before, kind of sporadically, and it's been useful, but having kind of a, focused place to go to for it is pretty cool. Now, the reasons I like this are it's a great way to find inspiration. You can see what other people are selling, what's being successful. Maybe somebody posts a screenshot with a sale of an item that you never heard of and you want to go investigate it, and wow, that sold for 6 figures. Let me go see what that is. Or, for me, every time I see somebody with the Vial of the Sands sale in there, I'm like, man, really got to go farm that. So put that on the mental list of things to do. And other than that, it's good for sparking conversation. I always try to find something interesting in people's screenshots and make a comment on it. Like if there's a BFA BOE that's sold, what eye level was it? Because, for example, Lazy Goldmaker posted a screenshot where he had a 6-figure sale of a drape of, I can't remember what it's called, the cloth cape from Dazara lore. And those, as I'm sure many of you are aware, have not been selling that great because of, I don't know, there's just a ton of them. But, 6 figures, wow, that's impressive. So, what's the story there? Let's figure out what's going on. So, this is good stuff. Helps talk about gold making. Anytime you're talking about gold making, you're gaining information, and that's a good thing for your bottom line. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about, we get a twofer this week, is back to behavioral economics. And this is something I believe we've talked about on the show before, but I wanted to bring it back because of a tweet that Mr. Billy Vaddis sent out the other day about a general discussion that has been taking place. And we're actually going to go ahead and open this up. So this is on the official World of Warcraft forums, and somebody made this lovely post. As a buyer on the auction house, in all caps, if someone lists an item for 500 gold and another person lists the same item for 1 copper less, which do you buy? Okay. Like, all of us goblins know, like, undercutting, it's not some big, like, ethical thing. It's not some hill you need to die on, right? Like, it's just the way the world works, right? Undercutting by only 1 copper keeps prices healthy. It's not encouraging ridiculous stuff. Like, okay, that's not what this discussion is about, because this got a lot of attention. As you can see, I'm just scrolling through it. Like, there's a lot of people who have voiced their opinions. Now, as you can imagine, there are the typical responses, like people getting very passionate about the fact that they're going to choose the higher priced item on some moral high grounds, which okay, yeah, whatever, man. But surprisingly, a lot of actual rational thought in just, yeah, you buy the cheapest thing because that's it. I think there was even someone in there trying to justify, like, oh, why would you even bother buying the cheapest thing? Because you're only saving 10 gold over like a year's worth of buying items. Okay, that's not the point. Okay, those comments aren't really that useful to us as goblins who are trying to actually learn something, but there were a few things that I wanted to point out and discuss briefly. So this one is more about pretty stacks, right? So I will say this. I'm looking for a stack of items, say Midnight Salmon, for example, and someone has 100 being sold individually at 25 gold versus someone selling a stack of 100 for 3,000 gold. I will pay 3,000 gold every time because I'm too lazy to click buy out 100 times. This isn't news to anyone, I'm sure, but always important to be reminded. Yeah, don't post things in stupid stack sizes. Like, think about your stack sizes. If you're posting enchants, don't stack them, post them at one at a time because you only have one piece of gear in any given slot. If you're posting flasks, think about, raid durations and sizes. If you're posting raw materials, don't post 5,000 ghost iron ore in stacks of one. That's just, it's rude and it's stupid and it doesn't work. Okay, that's reinforcing that. Next piece of example I wanted to look at is just a bit of irony. So I'm just going to read this comment and then point something out. I'll often buy the 10th on the list if the difference is small, as I don't want to support the undercutting. Okay, again, I don't understand this mindset whatsoever, but moving on. However, I do realize that most people are just using an add-on like TSM, which does this automatically. Sure. They aren't saying 1 copper less, the add-on is doing it for them. Okay, that's another discussion. Anyway, moving on. As a seller, when I'm facing this, I'll usually lower the price by 25%, bad, and keep doing it until the undercutting stops. I believe this is exactly how the market is supposed to work to drive the actual value. Now, I did want to point out this guy's in a guild called Extortion. I think there's just some irony there. And lastly, this is the actual useful thing that we can glean from this whole discussion that maybe is not as super obvious. So whenever I see someone who has posted more than a casual farming quantity of something, I buy from someone else. I don't support bots. Okay, that's important to note. People do have this mindset of, if you're posting in huge quantities, like, that's suspicious, I'm not going to touch that. Whenever I see someone posting a huge list of items, one at a time, that is not a quantity that makes sense, I buy from someone else because that behavior is what drove up the deposits, blah, 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 and annoying as all get out to click 50 auctions instead of 1 auction at a time. Absolutely agree with that, 100%. Like, don't post things in stacks of 1 when it doesn't make sense. That's what got us that whole stupid matte material deposit thing in the first place. Roll my eyes, buy from someone else. Again, that attitude is silly and you probably shouldn't worry about it too much. There's plenty of people who are rational about it. I routinely look for people with even prices that are near 100% of market value range. Obviously, if someone posts something at a ridiculously low price, I'll scoop it up. Okay, again, some contradictory statements there. They're totally willing to do it when somebody else is making the mistake. But anyway, the point here is, yeah, people actually do care and look at more than just the price and what's lowest. And it may not be a majority of people using the auction house, but it's not nobody. So I think Billy actually pointed out as well, yeah, even in his original post, something about banker names, right? So that's something you actually have control over. Things like people buying the more expensive item because it's undercut by 1 copper, you really don't have any control over that, and you really shouldn't worry about it. But as far as banker names, yeah, I'd say there's a decent amount of people who would rather buy items from somebody that doesn't have bank in their name or someone that's clearly a gold maker, just because, I don't know, they have some moral vendetta against gold makers. That's something you can control. So yeah, just name your character something like normal for World of Warcraft. I think that's just an easy step you can take to potentially increase your profits. So there you go. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. Have a read through some of these answers if you want. Don't read too much because it gets a little silly and repetitive, but yeah, this is just good stuff to be aware of. We'll move into Q&A for the video. First one, is there a way to see in advance the item deposits in Trade Skill Master? Yes. Now, there's not a option in Trade Skill Master settings that you can go in and flip on, at least not that I'm aware of, to show auction house deposits. But now that I think about it, that might actually exist. If it doesn't exist, however, this is a good opportunity to talk about custom price sources. So custom price sources in Tradesco Master are pretty much exactly how they sound. You can put in a TSM formula as you would in an auctioning operation, and it will just spit out a value based on whatever formula you put in there. So, for example, you could do 30% of the vendor sell price, and I think that's the 24-hour deposit. It might be less than that, actually. I should probably know this stuff off the top of my head. And with the custom price sources, you can actually select to show certain ones on your TSM tooltip. So what you can do is go and figure out what the auction house deposit is, multiply that by the vendor sell price, and then add that to your TSM tooltip. So there you go. Boom. Next question. When do you, or do you at all, think that crafting materials will normalize with the World First race starting to wind down? Yeah, I do believe they will come back down in price, and I say this based off of the fact that this is just what usually happens with raid tiers. It's kind of the normal cycle of things. Now, with that said, caveat, I always have to say this, past performance does not necessarily indicate future price increases or decreases. But historically, yeah, the price of current expansion materials goes up when a raid is released, and then slowly tails down over the following months until it flattens out, and then goes back up again for the next raid tier. And that's pretty reliable. You can rely on that pretty much every time a raid is released throughout expansions. So yeah, give it a month, then it'll probably come back down, and then when the next raid comes back, or when the next raid is released, we'll see an increase. Although, one thing to note, the next raid that is released, I believe, is only a 2-boss raid, so that could throw a bit of a wrench in the works. Maybe something a little bit more akin to what Trial of Valor was. I'm not actually sure how that affects things. I would imagine that there's probably just a less prominent increase in the overall material prices. That said, one of my goals between now and the next raid is to level up an alchemist or 2, depending on if I want to get really ambitious on 2 different servers, and take advantage of lower prices of herbs during the between period of raids. That way, when the new raid is released and the price of flasks and potions goes back up, I'll be ready with my rank 3s that I acquired more cheaply to take advantage of lots of profit to be had. Next question. Transmute meat to pet. Worth a shot or completely avoid? I did a decent amount of this towards the end of Legion and was pretty meh, so I would say avoid. Last question. Go-to markets to hit when allied races are released. Interesting answer to this one. So the conventional wisdom goes, new characters need bags. Okay, sure. Everyone says that. Here's my hot take on this. Instead of making a bunch of bags in preparation for this, probably everyone and their mother is doing this already, so maybe just watch for bag prices when the allied races that were supposed to be released on release are actually released. And if the bag prices actually drop, as I'm suspecting because a bunch of people prepared for it, buy up a bunch there and then sell them later down the road when the price goes back up. Boom. That's how you metagame the economy, my friends. All right, let's finish this one up for the week. Well, thank you all for listening once again. My name is Andrew, here for Dark Shore Capital. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them on the YouTube page down below, or follow me on Twitter. Again, there's some cool stuff going on Twitter, so if you are not taking part in that, I would suggest taking a look. I can direct you in a bunch of directions of good people to follow. And then if you have a more private question or you want to get into a more lengthy discussion, there's always my email, darkshorecapital@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.